Linda Martinez adjusted her simple navy blue dress as she walked across the sun-baked parade ground at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island. At 52, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun that revealed the premature lines around her eyes, marks left by years of worry and sacrifice. Today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life, watching her son Michael graduate from Marine Corps boot camp. The bleachers were already filling with families, their excited chatter mixing with the humid South Carolina air. Linda found a seat in the middle section, clutching her small purse and the program that bore her son's name among the graduating recruits. She had driven 12 hours from her small apartment in San Antonio to be here. Using vacation days, she couldn't really afford to lose from her job at the medical supply warehouse. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a voice beside her. A well-dressed couple was trying to squeeze past to reach empty seats. "Is this seat taken?" "No, please," Linda replied, moving her purse to make room. The woman smiled gratefully, her expensive jewelry catching the morning light as she settled beside her husband, who wore a polo shirt with a corporate logo Linda didn't recognize. "First graduation?" the woman asked pleasantly. "Yes," Linda answered. "My son Michael, yours." "Our son Bradley," the woman replied with obvious pride. "We're so excited, this is such an honor." Linda nodded, though she noticed the woman's manicured nails and designer handbag with a slight pang. She had done her best to look presentable today, but her dress was 3 years old and her shoes were comfortable rather than fashionable. Still, she was here, and that was what mattered. As the ceremony began, Linda's attention focused entirely on the parade ground where the new Marines stood in perfect formation. Somewhere in those precise ranks was Michael, the boy she had raised alone after his father died in a construction accident when he was 8. The boy who had struggled in school but never gave up. The boy who had announced at 18 that he wanted to be a Marine, despite Linda's fears about losing the only family she had left. The commanding officer's voice boomed across the parade ground as he addressed the families and new Marines. Linda listened with growing pride as he spoke about the transformation these young people had undergone, the dedication they had shown, and the honor they had earned. When the individual platoons were called forward to receive recognition, Linda strained to spot Michael among the sea of identical uniforms and covers. Finally, she saw him, third row, standing tall and proud, his posture perfect in a way she had never seen before. Tears blurred her vision as she realized her son had truly become a Marine. "That's him," she whispered to herself, pointing discreetly. "That's my Michael." The woman beside her followed her gaze. "Which one?" "Third row about the middle," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Private Martinez." "He looks wonderful," the woman said kindly. "You must be so proud." "I am," Linda replied simply, wiping away a tear. As the ceremony continued, Linda became aware of a commotion behind her. A group of Marines in dress blue uniforms had taken seats in the section reserved for military personnel. Among them was a captain whose bearing suggested significant experience and authority. He was speaking quietly with his companions, occasionally gesturing toward the graduating recruits. "The discipline is impressive," she heard him say to a fellow officer. "These drill instructors have done exceptional work with this class." Linda turned slightly, curious about the Marines who had come to observe the graduation. The captain appeared to be in his early 40s, with the weathered look of someone who had seen combat. His uniform was immaculate, his ribbons and decorations indicating extensive service. When the ceremony concluded and families began moving toward the designated meeting area, Linda gathered her things and prepared to find Michael. The excitement of finally seeing her son as a Marine overwhelmed her earlier self-consciousness about her appearance or circumstances. "Linda Martinez," came a voice from behind her. She turned to find a young Marine approaching, not Michael, but another new graduate who looked barely old enough to shave. "Yes," she replied. "Ma'am, Private Martinez asked me to find you. He's been held up for a few minutes with some paperwork, but he'll meet you by the flagpole in about 10 minutes. "Thank you," Linda said, touched that Michael had thought to send word rather than leave her wondering. As she made her way toward the flagpole, Linda passed groups of celebrating families. Many were taking professional photographs, their expensive cameras capturing every moment. Others were presenting their new Marines with gifts, watches, jewelry, or other mementos of the occasion. Linda's gift for Michael was simpler, A letter she had written the night before, expressing her pride and love, along with his father's old wallet that she had saved for this day. It wasn't much, but it carried meaning that no expensive gift could match. Mrs. Martinez. Linda turned to find the Marine captain from the bleachers approaching her. Up close, she could see the name tape on his uniform, REYNOLDS. His expression was respectful but curious. Yes, she replied, wondering why a captain would want to speak with her. Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear your son's name during the ceremony. Private Michael Martinez. That's right, Linda confirmed, pride evident in her voice despite her confusion about this officer's interest. Captain Reynolds studied her face carefully, as if trying to place her. Ma'am, this might sound unusual, but could I ask your maiden name? The question caught Linda off guard. My maiden name? It was Vasquez, Linda Vasquez, but I don't understand why. Captain Reynolds went completely still, his expression shifting from curiosity to something approaching shock. He stared at her for a long moment, his mouth slightly open as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Captain, Linda asked, concerned by his sudden change in demeanor, is something wrong? Reynolds seemed to struggle with himself before finally speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. Ma'am, were you ever in the military? Linda hesitated, old instincts warning her to be cautious about revealing too much. A long time ago, she said carefully. Why do you ask? What was your call sign? Reynolds asked, his voice now urgent but still quiet. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. It had been over 20 years since anyone had asked her that question. She glanced around to ensure no one else was listening before answering. Viper, she said quietly. But that was a very long time ago, Captain. I don't see how. Captain Reynolds actually took a step backward, his face draining of color. He looked at her with an expression that mixed awe, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. Jesus Christ, he breathed, then immediately caught himself. I'm sorry, ma'am, I never expected. Expected what? Linda asked, growing more concerned by his reaction. Before Reynolds could answer, Michael's voice called out across the area. Mom. Linda turned to see her son approaching, his face beaming with joy and pride. He looked magnificent in his dress blue uniform, every inch the Marine she had hoped he would become. For a moment, all thoughts of the strange captain were forgotten as she embraced her son. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, holding him tight. Thanks for coming, Mom, Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. It means everything to me. When they separated, Linda noticed that Captain Reynolds was still standing nearby, watching them with an unreadable expression. Michael noticed him too and immediately came to attention. Good afternoon, sir, Michael said formally. At ease, Marine, Reynolds replied, though his eyes remained fixed on Linda. Congratulations on your graduation. Thank you, sir, Michael responded, clearly pleased to be acknowledged by such a senior officer. Reynolds turned back to Linda, his expression still showing the shock of recognition. Ma'am, I wonder if I might speak with you privately for a moment. Linda looked between the captain and her son, uncertain about this unexpected development. I suppose so, but I don't understand what this is about. Michael, Reynolds said, addressing her son directly, would you mind giving your mother and me a few minutes? There's something I need to discuss with her. Michael looked confused but nodded respectfully. Of course, sir. Mom, I'll be right over there with some of the other guys from my platoon. As Michael walked away, Reynolds gestured toward a quieter area near the base of the flagpole. Linda followed, her mind racing with questions about why this Marine officer seemed so affected by learning her old call sign. Mrs. Martinez, Reynolds began once they were alone, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll forgive the directness. Were you a pilot? Linda's heart began to race. These were questions she had hoped never to answer again, secrets she had buried when she left the military and tried to build a normal life for herself and her son. Captain Reynolds, she said carefully, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm just here to watch my son graduate. I'm not sure why you're asking these questions. Reynolds studied her face intently. Ma'am, 23 years ago I was a young lieutenant serving in Somalia. My unit was pinned down during a firefight in Mogadishu, and we called for air support. The pilot who responded had the call sign, Viper. Linda felt the blood drain from her face. Somalia, Mogadishu. The memories she had spent decades trying to suppress came flooding back with painful clarity. "That pilot," Reynolds continued, his voice growing more certain, "saved my life and the lives of 12 other Marines that day. The official records were classified, but those of us who were there never forgot. We never forgot the voice on the radio that guided us to safety, or the incredible flying that kept us alive when everything went to hell." Linda remained silent, but Reynolds could see the recognition in her eyes. "You're her, aren't you?" he said quietly. "You're Viper." Linda stared at Captain Reynolds, her mind reeling as memories she had carefully buried for over 2 decades came rushing back. The heat of Mogadishu, the desperate radio calls, the weight of lives hanging in the balance. She had spent years learning to live with those memories, and now this Marine officer was bringing them all back with a few simple questions. "Captain," she said carefully, "I think you have me confused with someone else." But Reynolds was shaking his head, his expression growing more certain by the moment. "No, ma'am, I could never forget that voice. You talked us through the worst firefight of my life. You kept us calm when we thought we were all going to die." Linda glanced toward Michael, who was laughing with his fellow Marines, oblivious to the conversation taking place near the flagpole. Her son knew nothing about her military service beyond the basic fact that she had served briefly before he was born. She had never told him about Somalia, about the missions, about the life she had left behind. "Captain Reynolds," she said firmly, "I'm just here to celebrate my son's graduation. I don't know what you think you remember, but—" "October 3rd, 1993, Reynolds interrupted quietly. "Task Force Ranger, the Battle of Mogadishu. You were flying a U-60 Black Hawk with the call sign Viper. My unit was trapped in a building surrounded by hostile forces, and you came in under heavy fire to extract us." The specific date and details hit Linda like a physical blow. There was no mistaking what Reynolds was describing. It was the mission that had changed everything, the mission that had ended her military career and haunted her dreams for years afterward. "You remember," Reynolds said, seeing the recognition in her eyes. "I can see it in your face." Linda looked around nervously, ensuring no one else was close enough to overhear. "Captain, that was a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore." "With respect, ma'am, you'll always be that person to me and the other Marines who were there," Reynolds replied. "What you did that day, it was extraordinary." "What I did," Linda said bitterly, "was follow orders and try not to get anyone killed. That's all." Reynolds studied her carefully, nodding the pain in her voice. "Something happened after that mission, didn't it? Something that made you leave the service." Linda's jaw tightened. "I don't discuss my military service, Captain, especially not here, not today." "I understand," Reynolds said gently. "But I need you to know something. After that day in Mogadishu, I made it my business to learn everything I could about the pilot who saved us. The official records were mostly classified, but I heard stories. Incredible stories about a helicopter pilot who could fly missions that no one else would even attempt." "Stories get exaggerated," Linda replied dismissively. "Do they?" Reynolds challenged. "Like the story about the pilot who flew into a hot landing zone in Bosnia to extract wounded peacekeepers, or the one about the helicopter that somehow made it back to base with half its tail rotor shot away." Each reference to her past missions felt like another weight being added to Linda's shoulders. She had worked so hard to leave that life behind, to become just another single mother working a regular job and raising her son. "Captain, please," she said quietly. "I just want to enjoy my son's graduation." Reynolds seemed to sense her distress and softened his approach. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't mean to upset you. It's just meeting you here like this after all these years. It's overwhelming." Linda looked at him more carefully, seeing past the captain's uniform to the young lieutenant he had once been. "You were the one on the radio," she realized suddenly. "The one who kept giving me updates on your position." Reynolds nodded. "Lieutenant Reynolds, 2nd Platoon. You probably saved my life a dozen times that day, talking me through the extraction procedures while you were taking fire." The memory was coming back now, despite Linda's efforts to keep it buried. The desperate voice on the radio, young and scared, but trying to stay professional. The impossible landing zone surrounded by hostile forces. The split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. "You did good that day, Lieutenant," she said quietly, using his old rank. "You kept your men together when everything was falling apart." "Only because you were there," Reynolds replied. only because Viper was watching over us." They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in memories of that terrible day in Somalia. Finally, Linda spoke again. "How many of your men made it out?" "All of them," Reynolds said firmly. "Every single Marine in that building came home because of you." Linda felt tears threatening and quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Mrs. Martinez," Reynolds said carefully, "can I ask what happened? Why did you leave the service? Your record was exemplary, your skills were legendary among helicopter pilots. You could have had any assignment you wanted." Linda was quiet for a long moment, watching Michael interact with his fellow Marines. Her son looked so happy, so proud to be part of something larger than himself. She had never wanted to burden him with the complexities of her own military experience. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't enough," she said finally. "Sometimes the cost is too high even when you succeed." Reynolds waited for her to continue, sensing there was more to the story. "There was another mission," Linda said quietly. 6 months after Mogadishu, a rescue operation that went wrong. People died because of decisions I made, and I couldn't keep flying after that." "What happened?" Reynolds asked gently. Linda shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I came home, I raised my son, and he's become a better person than I ever was." "Ma'am, with respect, that's not true," Reynolds said firmly. "You were one of the finest pilots the military ever had. The lives you saved, the missions you completed, that legacy doesn't just disappear because you left the service." "It does for me," Linda replied. "I'm not Viper anymore, Captain. I'm just Linda Martinez, and I work in a warehouse, and I drive a 15-year-old Honda, and I'm proud of my son who just became a Marine." Reynolds looked at her with something approaching reverence. "You're still a hero, ma'am, whether you want to acknowledge it or not." Before Linda could respond, Michael approached them, his expression curious about the lengthy conversation between his mother and the captain. "Mom, is everything okay?" Linda quickly composed herself, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Captain Reynolds was just congratulating me on having such a fine son." Michael beamed with pride. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you." Reynolds looked between mother and son, clearly seeing the resemblance now that he knew to look for it. "Your mother should be very proud, Marine. You've joined an elite organization with a proud tradition." "She is proud, sir," Michael replied. "She's always supported me, even when I know she was worried about me joining the Corps." "Any mother would worry," Reynolds said, glancing meaningfully at Linda. "But some mothers understand better than others what it means to serve." Michael looked confused by the comment, but before he could ask for clarification, another voice interrupted them. "Captain Reynolds," called a fellow officer. "Sir, the colonel is looking for you." Reynolds nodded to his,